Is the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392 better than a Ford Bronco? That's what we're going to find out in today's video. Alright, Jeep just dropped off the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392, and in today's video I want to give you a little exterior-interior walk around and my first impressions coming from a Ford Bronco owner's perspective. As I'm sure many of you know, I own a 2021 Ford Bronco Big Bend, and I've upgraded it to the Sasquatch wheel and tire package and suspension, and I thought it'd be interesting to give you my first impressions of this car because, in all honesty, I've never driven a Jeep Wrangler. I've sat in the passenger seat a ton of times. I've also seen about a dozen of these every single day I drive on the road because Utah seems to be a haven for these types of vehicles and Subarus. And so I figured I would share my thoughts and impressions driving this vehicle for the very first time. I drove it just about an hour today, and I wanted to kind of keep it raw and unfiltered and just talk about first thoughts and impressions because, you know, you ask a Ford Bronco owner, they're going to say a Bronco's better. You ask a Jeep Wrangler owner, they're going to say a Jeep is better. But I'm going to try to keep this as unbiased as possible because I respect both vehicles, and without one, the other one really wouldn't exist, or at least wouldn't improve. And that's an example here with a 2024 model year. Now, if you guys are looking for a comprehensive car review of the Wrangler 392, talking about all the specifications, all of the interior, exterior features, how it drives down the road, you're going to want to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the full comprehensive car review. This video is not meant to be that. It's just a first impressions unboxing video versus the full car review where I'll dive in depth into everything that this vehicle has to offer. The one standing in front of me has been updated for 2024, and starting off with the front end, you may notice a difference, you may not. Personally, I really don't notice a difference, but I'm not a huge Jeep enthusiast. The front grille has been modified for 2024. They made it a little bit shorter, a little bit wider. At the same time, they opened up some of these vents over here to allow greater airflow into the engine under the hood, of course. Now, the reason they did this is now you can get a winch directly from the factory, and as you can see, it kind of bulges out, and so in order to get a little bit greater airflow, they had to keep this narrower, made this a little bit shorter, but then at the same time make it a little bit wider. So lots of reconstruction on the front end just to be able to integrate this front winch, but that is impressive that you can get that now from Jeep and not have to go in the aftermarket. And the benefit to that is, you know, this has been tested through all the various safety tests that Jeep has to undergo to be able to produce their vehicles. So this is going to be a little bit safer than you just putting an aftermarket winch on the front end. Now, of course, you have the steel bumper over here, and the rest of the front end, you know, with the LED headlights and LED running lights, doesn't look that much different than the current outgoing 2023 model year, but it's still a pretty good looking car. And coming over to the side here, this one being the 392, which is the top of the line spec, it comes with the Extreme Recon package, which are these 35-inch tires. They're the BF Goodrich all-terrain. Then you've got 17-inch beadlock capable wheels over here. And then the other change they did in 2024 is they removed the antenna from the side of the vehicle and they've integrated it into the windshield, so you have this trail rated badge instead now. And then the grille of the 392 has been modified because you have this large air inlet to suck in so much air into this V8 engine. Then you got this 392 here with these gold accents. You'll notice the gold accents is kind of the only indicator that you have the big V8 engine under the hood. You'll notice it here with the tow hooks, over here on the sticker, and then throughout the vehicle as well. But I personally think they should have added some other features to differentiate the 392 engine from all the other trim levels. On the side, they really didn't make very much changes, kind of your traditional Jeep Wrangler look. And then coming over to the back, same story here. You got the LED taillights that have been familiar since 2018. You got a steel bumper, 35-inch spare. And then one cool feature with this one being the 392 is the quad exhaust system. So two over here and two over there. And as you can see, you've got a little bit more of that gold accent on the tow hook in the back. But, you know, I've teased this engine long enough. Let's jump under the hood. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Now, in order to open up the hood on a Jeep, you just open up these flaps on the passenger and driver side, and then you flip up this hood. It's kind of a two-handed job. Now that I use both hands to prop it open, you don't have any type of hood struts. You have this hood prop here, which is incredibly hot because, well, it is a warm day today, but you know, this engine produces a lot of heat. And then as you can see, this hood scoop, which Jeep calls the Hydro Guide, is actually functional. You know, it pumps air into the air inlet, which goes into the engine, of course. And well, this is a very familiar engine if you guys are Challenger or Charger or even, you know, Jeep enthusiasts. This is the 6.4 liter naturally aspirated V8 Hemi that you'll find on the Challenger and Charger Scat Packs, formerly the SRTs. And it is a phenomenal engine. It's been around for, I think, coming close to a decade, but this has got to be one of my favorite engines. And I own this same engine inside of my Dodge Challenger Scat Pack, and that car will always have a special place in my heart. And honestly, I think this engine sounds better in terms of its exhaust note than the Hellcat engine. So change my mind there. Not great on fuel economy, but you probably aren't buying one of these for that. Now, in terms of output here, it's a little bit different than the Challengers and Chargers. You're looking at 475 horsepower for 2024 model year and 470 pound-feet of torque. This thing will do 0 to 60 in just about 4.5 seconds. So very impressive stats here. All of that power is sent through an 8-speed automatic transmission, and you only get 4-wheel drive as standard on this car. So whereas some of the other Jeeps you can get like a rear-wheel drive or the 2-wheel drive version, this one you can't. You have to get the 4-wheel drive because there's just too much power heading to the wheels. And honestly, even accelerating in the 4-wheel drive mode, it'll still spin the wheels. It'll still chirp as you're accelerating. So really crazy amounts of torque going to these wheels. And you know, this frame just really isn't made for that much power. Now you may be wondering, why didn't they put in the Hellcat engine in here? Well, a couple reasons. For one, this engine barely fit in the vehicle to begin with. They had to modify the suspension, the hood. The Hellcat engine, of course, that supercharger would take up even more space. But the other reason, honestly, I wouldn't want a Hellcat engine in this thing in terms of drivability. I mean, even this thing, as I accelerate, not even pushing the pedal down all the way to the ground, this thing kind of steers itself. It kind of chooses its own direction. And that's just because there's so much power going into the wheels that it almost torque steers in an all-wheel drive car. Now, if this had a Hellcat engine in it, it would probably be like what Vin Diesel says, where the frame literally twists as you're accelerating. It would just be way too much power and honestly dangerous. You know, if Jeep wanted to do that, they'd probably have to revise the entire platform that this vehicle is built on because it's just not built for a 6.2 liter supercharged V8. But let's talk about the interior now, because that's where most of the updates for 2024 happened. All right, jumping inside, first thing I will notice is the sound of this door as it closes. Now, I will say my Bronco sounds pretty good when the door closes. It sounds very utilitarian, but this sounds even more utilitarian, especially when you're inside the vehicle and getting out. Just the lock-unlock sound, it just sounds very, I don't know, like military-like. It almost reminds me of the G-Wagon Mercedes in terms of its sturdiness. This one is the 392, which is the fully equipped version. So as you can see, you have these Napa red leather seats, Rubicon 392 stitched into them. And a first for 2024, you've got power seats now as standard on the 392. It's optional on the other trim levels, and you have lumbar support. So that was something I think that the Ford Bronco kind of forced this vehicle to do to be able to compete. Now, starting off with the door panel, it surprised me that this is all soft touch material here. It's injection molded plastic, but it's soft touch. Of course, I showed off the door handle. You got your mirror controls, lock and unlock. Red stitching here because, well, you got red leather seats on the Rubicon 392, soft touch material here, and a little net. Now, one thing I noticed initially jumping in the car as compared to the Bronco is, well, for one, you don't have frameless windows here, whether you like that or not. Some people like it, some people don't. But I did notice this door is a little bit narrower compared to the Bronco. The Bronco's a little bit wider or a little bit longer. And so when you're sitting inside the seat of the Bronco, you don't really notice the edge of the door, whereas here you do. The whole cabin kind of feels a little bit tighter. Not uncomfortably tighter, but it does feel a little bit smaller and tighter overall. Now let's jump inside and let's turn this vehicle on. Now this is my favorite part because listen to the sound. I mean, this thing sounds like a sports car. I really love the sound of this 392. I can't say that enough, but not all Wranglers are gonna come with that, of course. Now, starting off on the left-hand side, you've got this cool textured material. Now, some of this stuff has been updated for 2024. You still have this 7-inch digital gauge cluster display with some analog displays, but I like the analog. Like, it's got some digital over here as well with the 4 high, 4 low. I do wish it was red because this is the 392, but I'm being a little nitpicky here. Steering wheel feels really nice in the hands, a little bit more of that red stitching. steering, you got your cruise control here, and then on the left-hand side is how you control this digital gauge cluster. Now, if you guys have ever used a Dodge product before, including my Dodge Challenger, it's almost the exact same gauge cluster display, so you utilize it the same way. There's not too much functionality, but you can swipe through various different menus. And then, of course, I do want to point out these metal paddle shifters that you have for this 392, which is very fitting because this is a performance-tuned engine, so you might as well have paddle shifters on the steering wheel. Now, this is new for 2024. It's a 12.3-inch touchscreen display. Previous to this, they had an 8-inch and even smaller than that on the base trims. Now 12.3-inch is standard across the board, and this is impressive. Now, the Bronco standard is 8-inch, and you can upgrade to a 12.3, so it kind of matches the Bronco, but this comes on even the base sport trim level, so that's a really nice feature. I do think I like the Broncos a little bit more because it's a little bit taller. This one's widescreen, that one's more of like a box, and so really personal preference. But the software here, you know, this is Uconnect 5, which I haven't used too much, but it seems very easy and intuitive to use. You got your Android Auto here, you got your navigation, your vehicle apps. You can open up your vehicle settings here with your off-road pages, which includes everything from your steering angle, you know, your pitch and roll, which is something I have in my Ford Bronco as well. What I don't have, which is an option, is a front camera on the Bronco. You have that over here on the Wrangler, and of course that's to be expected because this is the highest trim level. Over on the passenger side, you've got a little bit more of that rubberized material. It's like a leather, but it's not. It's an injection molded plastic, and then some more red stitching, a revised grab handle over here, and then a ton of buttons, a little bit more than what I have in my Bronco, but there's a lot of redundancies here. So you can turn on your heated seats here, or you can use the buttons down here to activate it. You've got physical controls for your volume, your fan speed, your tune, and then these are your window switches over here, whereas the Bronco has it over here. It's located over on the dashboard itself. You got a cigarette style power outlet. You've got a front and rear locker, auxiliary gauges over here, and then a ton of different USB ports, USB-C and USB-A. And then one thing I found was a little bit weird is this gear selector is over to the right a little bit, and then your four-wheel drive selector is located closer to the driver's side. I feel like this should have been switched because you're going to use this gear selector way more often than this 4 high, 4 low. I mean, this you'll use when you're off-roading, but for the most part, you're going to keep it in just 4 auto, and this kind of feels far out of the way. So that's just a little nitpick there, but a little bit odd. 2 cup holders, no wireless charging pad here, which really surprises me because the Bronco does come with that. Mine doesn't have it, but it is an option. You've got a leather handbrake handle over here, and then a soft touch arm console with some more red stitching. And then in terms of the width of this vehicle, it doesn't feel much more narrower than the Bronco. That was something that surprised me that I thought would be the case because the Bronco is a little bit of a wider vehicle, but this doesn't feel narrow by any means. It's probably a proper amount of width. Where I did notice a big difference is it feels like you're sitting a little bit closer to the windshield in the Wrangler than in the Bronco. This dashboard is a lot shorter in this vehicle as compared to my Bronco, which is also a very raked windshield. You know, you have that same kind of straightness to it, but this one you just feel like you're sitting closer to the hood, and you have a larger view of the hood, whereas in the Bronco you're sitting a little bit further back. You don't see as much of the hood when you're driving down the road. So that was kind of the first thing I noticed. I just love the sound of that door closing. Now, there's a couple things I want to address coming from a Ford Bronco perspective that I kept hearing when I was shopping or purchasing my Ford Bronco, and that is that the Bronco seats are much more comfortable than that in the Wrangler. And honestly, I can't really tell a difference. I mean, these seats are comfortable, and I feel like there's just as much thigh support here as there is in my Bronco. Maybe somebody taller than me may have some issues with these seats, or maybe they've perhaps updated them for 2024 model year, but these are just as comfortable as the seats in my Bronco. Now, they're a little bit of a different material. These being the leather, they feel a little bit stiffer than what I have with the cloth seats in my Bronco, but in terms of seating position and comfort, I really can't tell a difference. Now, I will be taking this vehicle on a longer road trip, so I should have a better idea for how comfortable it is on longer trips, and I'll report that information in the full car review. The second thing I want to address is something that I think has been pretty accurate in describing the difference between the Bronco and the Wrangler, and that is how this vehicle drives down the road. Now, this one, of course, has a solid front axle versus the Bronco being an independent front suspension. And I have noticed a difference between the two. I didn't think I would, but I have noticed it. Especially when you're driving on highway speeds or accelerating in this vehicle. Like I said earlier, this steering kind of tends to take you where it wants to go, and you almost have to wrestle it a little bit to keep it centered down the lane or keep it going where you want it to go. Because of that independent front suspension, I noticed it'll wander down the lane. So occasionally I'll go a little bit more left, a little bit more right. Whereas in the Bronco, I can essentially just hold the steering wheel and the vehicle will stay pretty centered in the lane and I can guide it pretty easily. So it is noticeably different. I can't say it's a deal breaker by any means, but it is a difference between the two vehicles, and I do prefer the daily drivability of the Bronco just because of that. Now, the next thing I've noticed in my short 1 hour, 1.5 hour drive in this vehicle is the ride quality, and comparing that to the Bronco, I can't really tell a huge difference between the two. I mean, going over the exact same bumps in my Bronco with the Sasquatch suspension feels very similar. Now, whereas the Bronco has Bilstein shocks, this one has Fox, so maybe that's the difference between the two in terms of slight differences. But for the most part, the frame absorbs it the same way. The sound of the interior as you're going over speed bumps sounds almost identical. This one may be a little bit softer, but I'd be really hard pressed to tell the difference. It kind of depends on what bumps you're going over. Now, in terms of road noise, my particular tester has the one touch open sky roof. So you push a button over here, kind of like where you have a sunroof, and this opens up the entire soft top of the Wrangler. That's a cool feature that Bronco doesn't even offer on any trim level, and I wish they did because it makes it a lot easier than having to get out of the car to open up the soft top. But the major difference between this and my soft top Bronco is this panel over here is plastic with an actual window, whereas in my Bronco, this is all soft touch fabric. So you would think that because of that, the interior would be a little bit quieter. Also, Jeep says they added additional sound deadening with acoustic glass front windows and then more insulation over here in this A-pillar and the top of the roof. But honestly, I can't really tell a huge difference in the interior sound quality being a lot quieter than that in the Bronco. I mean, maybe it's a couple decibels quieter because mine is fully soft top, but this is definitely not as quiet as your traditional crossover. You can have a call in here, you can have a conversation, and Jeep says that as of 2024, they've added some active noise canceling, but it's still a pretty loud vehicle overall. So I wouldn't recommend conference calls with London inside of this vehicle, but having a conversation with family is going to be just fine. And they really have come a long way from like the mid 2000s Wranglers. My wife used to have a 2005 Jeep Wrangler with a soft top, and it was much louder inside the cabin than this. This is manageable, but it's not much more quieter than the Bronco. It's pretty comparable. All right, now let's jump into the back and show off the rear seats. Now, I do like this is also soft touch material over here, but given the price point, you would expect it. Again, the door is kind of narrow, and then I've noticed that the entry into the second row is also pretty narrow. It's narrower than what I have in the Bronco. Now, of course, my Bronco also has side steps. This one doesn't. It has these rock rails because this is the Rubicon version, but that's something you can always add in the future. I do like that these have the red seats, and then you've got these fold down headrests, which is exactly the same as my Bronco. Now, jumping inside, step-in height is pretty similar. What I will say is legroom is also very similar, but it feels like my knees are a little bit closer to my chest than that in the Bronco. The Bronco felt like it was a little bit more like a conventional crossover versus this one being almost like a mid-sized pickup truck type of feel. Now, it's not dramatic, it's not something you can't get used to, but it is a little bit different. And again, these seats are a little bit on the harder side just because they're leather, but they're also brand new, and so you'll break in over time. One thing I like more about the Wrangler is you have rear air vents over here. You can't even get that as an option on the Bronco. The Bronco says there's air vents located under the seats, but for anybody who's sat in the back seat, those air vents under the seats really don't do anything. You kind of want that airflow in your face to cool you off, and this one does have that. You got the window switches over here in the middle, just like the Bronco. And then I do like the fact that there's lots of connections down here. So you've got a household power outlet just like my Bronco, but then over here you've got 4 USB ports to plug in a bunch of different devices. And then if you fold down this center arm console, you've got 2 cup holders over here, which my Bronco doesn't have, but you can get that on the higher trim levels as well. And then a little slot for maybe your phone or a wallet. Now, one other difference to point out with the Wrangler versus the Bronco is the Wrangler has this bar that connects the passenger and driver side, and it kind of obstructs the view when you look outside the vehicle when the roof is open. That is one thing I do prefer with the Bronco compared to this vehicle, because the Bronco's pillar is located behind the second row seats where your speakers are located, and so it kind of is out of the way. So if you're sitting sitting in the second row of the Bronco, you have an open air feel to it. Now, I will say the speaker will probably sound a little bit better when it's over you than it is behind you, but I think that's a sacrifice I'm willing to take with the Bronco. Now, jumping into the trunk, kind of a similar opening mechanism, although the door feels lighter here in the Wrangler than it is the Bronco. The Bronco almost has this strut that kind of pushes back on you, and this one, even though it's a 35-inch tire, isn't that bad. Now, mine's the soft top, so it doesn't have this glass opening, but you open it up, and then the trunk in the Bronco is bigger. Not only is it wider, it also feels like it's a little bit higher up, and then you've got generally more space back here. Now, you have this bag over here where you can hide some of these panels, similar to what you can do with the Bronco, where you can take the doors off and put them in here. Now, you can't fit the doors in the back seats, but you can fit these panels, so if you want to have that open air feeling, you can do that without having to leave them at home. And then underneath here, just a small compartment. This is what operates your Warren winch if you need it. And then I do like, you know, Wranglers have had this for a while, these door hinge slots, where if you're taking the doors off, you can put the bolts in here so you never lose them. That's a nice touch over there. You also have the Alpine subwoofer for this particular trim level because it has the upgraded audio system, but a pretty simple trunk overall. All right, while we're back here, let's take a listen to that exhaust one more time. Man, that does sound good. Now, in order to get the best sound, you need to push this one button over here on the dashboard. It's located right underneath the heated seats button, and by pushing this button, it will open up the baffles and the vehicle will sound so much better. Those cold starts, those accelerations on the freeway, they sound amazing with the 392 under the hood. All right, now the last thing I want to discuss on this vehicle is the pricing, and boy is it expensive, but you do get a lot of bang for your buck. But man, it is a hard pill to swallow. The Rubicon 392 starts at just shy of $90,000, so already extremely expensive. But this one, with the one-touch top and a few additional goodies, this one's around $95,000. So you're pushing almost 100 grand for a Jeep Wrangler with you know, removable doors. It's kind of insane, but I do love that engine, and honestly, there's not much competition in this same field. I mean, the Bronco Raptor, that one's only a V6. The closest competitor is probably a Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, and that's like, you know, pushing 150, 200K. So this is probably the bargain or most affordable V8 off-road SUV, but it definitely doesn't come cheap. All right, folks, that finishes off today's walk-around video and first impressions coming from a Bronco owner's perspective. Make sure you stay tuned for the full comprehensive car review where I discuss all of the features of this bad boy standing behind me. But if this is your first time stopping by and you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for all of the future content coming with the Wrangler 392. Also, check me out on all the social media, Instagram, TikTok, where I create a lot of short form content, including this vehicle behind me. And as always, everybody, I hope you stay schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.